Welcome to A Course in Graceful Presence. Today I wanted to talk briefly about the importance of living with graceful presence in tumultuous times. Again, ethics and values, which the course that you're enrolled in, ethics and values, really, if we think about it, is all about learning how to live a good life. It's learning about the art of being human, right? The skillful practice of being a human being. And that can be challenging, especially in difficult times. I mean, here we are now in June, today is June 1st, 2020. And I dare say that this is a challenging time to be alive. I mean, it's easy to feel some despair and discouragement as we see what's happening around us, just listening to the news or, surfing social media. We have, COVID-19 pandemic, the pandemic that is still with us and threatens a second spike of infections as we're all growing tired of social distancing and quarantine. And this pandemic has created massive unemployment and economic insecurity. Perhaps some of you are, struggling with fewer hours at work or lost jobs or a sense of, fear about what the future will be. We're experiencing the politics of resentment and outrage. A politics where we seem to be so polarized and paralyzed between Democrats and Republicans, between progressives and conservatives, where both sides seem to just hate each other with a passionate intensity. And adding to all of this, of course, is the racial unrest and protests in the streets of many of our cities over the death of George Floyd and the treatment of black men at the hands of law enforcement. I mean, it's easy to look out at these events, all of which are beyond our control or beyond any one person's control, and to come to feel, hopeless and powerless and worried about the future. So it's even more important, I think, in this moment for us all to cultivate graceful presence in our life. Now, it might seem odd to say and completely irrelevant as well that, your best response to these tumultuous times is just to be gracefully present to life, to your life as it unfolds. But let's just take a moment to review the practices of graceful presence so far, right? Practice number one, don't react to your emotions, your thoughts, your desires in the moment. No second darts, as Buddha would say. It's natural to see and hear what's going on and to experience anger, fear, and outrage, those first art experiences. But, don't react to those emotions and become angry, fearful, or outraged. Instead, acknowledge these feelings, but breathe into them. It's not really helpful to be angry, afraid, or outraged. These only create more anger, fear, and outrage. The second practice, right, to care for your body. In this instance, we might recall that when you feel threatened, your body tenses up, your blood pressure goes up, your heartbeat, beats faster, your digestive system stops, your body gets ready for, fight or flight. So to be aware of these bodily responses and then to intentionally respond by breathing calmly and deeply and caring for your body, with confidence and resilience. So stand and move with your chest out, your head up, right? Just tell yourself to be present physically with confidence and resilience and cheerfulness and that loving and infectious enthusiasm for life. Carry your posture, yourself, your body that way. 3, control your thinking. Don't let your thoughts turn negative and hateful or go down dark paths. So inform your inner voice with love, compassion, forgiveness, empathy. Ensure Make sure that your conversations with yourself and others are not backward looking with blame and accusation, but forward looking to solutions and mutual benefit that would serve everyone, or solutions that would serve everyone's needs for, safety, security, respect, and meaningful freedom. Let's not forget that even those who we disagree with, whose behavior we think is wrong, that even they still, right, need to feel safe, secure, respected, and free. And oftentimes their behaviors are a reaction to feeling unsafe, insecure, right, disrespected, and not free. 4, focus on what you can control, not on what you cannot. We tend to despair and feel hopeless and powerless when we focus on things we can do nothing about. Instead, look for the small things that you can do, right, to improve your life and the life of others. Even finding just small things and doing them, if that's all you can do, will help you feel a greater sense of power and control. You can't control the actions of others, only your own. So just be the example of how you hope others behave. It might not change their behavior, but it will bring you peace and greater confidence. 5, right? Aspire to the greatness of goodness. We often want to change the world when in reality, all we can really change is ourselves. And that's enough. Challenging times like we live in today provide us with lots of opportunities to develop character strength. So each day, try to become just a little bit better. Try to move a little bit closer to being your best possible self. Now, we haven't gotten to practices 6 and 7. Practice 6 is to essentially treat and esteem others as you want to be treated and esteemed. So the golden rule that we'll look at here soon. And 7 is just to be gracefully present to the next 15 minutes. And we'll get to those. But first, I want to share with you a story and then a question before, in our next lecture, moving to those 2 practices. In graduate school, I worked as a research assistant and teaching assistant to one Father Joseph Flanagan, a Jesuit priest, a man who I greatly respected and learned a lot from. He once told me a story that has always stayed with me. In the spring of 1963, Father Flanagan traveled to Birmingham, Alabama, which was the main battleground for civil rights and a hotspot of racial tension. He went as a white ally to the black civil rights leaders to help observe and, where possible, to hold the white power structures accountable. As it happened, he arrived to witness what has been called the Children's March. On 11 a.m., on May 2nd, 1963, over 4,000 African-American school children left their classrooms to march for civil rights. This touched off a week of protests and marches, during which Americans saw on the nightly news how the police and white political leaders of Birmingham set loose police dogs and fire hoses on the young children. Quite a shocking sight to see such violent means used to intimidate peaceful protesters and children at that. But it was an encounter that Father Flanagan saw that got to me. He watched as a young black boy walked past a big old white Southern sheriff who was smoking a cigar. According to Father Flanagan, the sheriff, stopped the young boy and calmly reached down and snuffed out his cigar on the young boy's forehead. The young boy just looked up at this white sheriff and said, "I love you, sir." And then he just walked away. Now, it's that image, right, that I see in my mind of a violent and cruel action met by a loving response that stays with me, right? I mean, it gives visual representation to Jesus' invitation to love our enemies and do good to those who hate us. It reminds me of what Buddha said, right? That hatred can never put an end to hatred. Only love can. And this is an unalterable law. I want you to think about that story as I ask you the following question. It's actually two questions, as we'll see, but how should we deal with wrongful acts and the anger they generate? Now, it's really two questions, because implicit in that question, there is the we that might be us privately. So when someone harms me personally, right, how should I respond to their wrong action and the anger that I might feel? But it also implies a second question, that we would be us as a state, as a government, right? How should the state deal with wrongful acts and the anger they generate when it's citizens who are harming other citizens, and the anger is not private anger, so to speak, but sort of public anger? I'm thinking of what's going on today with the civil unrest over the killing of George Floyd and the use of police force against so many black men. I mean, how should we respond to the killing of an unarmed black man at the hands of police? But also, how should we respond to the protesters who burn police cars and loot and destroy private and public property? I mean, maybe you side with law enforcement and believe that they have a very difficult and dangerous job and have to respond to events not knowing if their own lives are in danger. And now you support their taking a more aggressive and forceful stand against the protesters. Or maybe you side with the protesters and believe that we've too long ignored police brutality against minority men, and the protests, perhaps even violent ones, are the only way to draw attention to this injustice. And now the demands of the protesters need to be listened to and honored, not ignored or put down. Or maybe you believe something entirely different from these two positions that I mentioned. Whatever you believe about our current situation, the question I want you to think about for our next few lectures is, what should be our guiding principle in deciding how to respond and confront wrongdoing? Is anger, even though understandable, is anger really ever justifiable, right? Now, here's an example that perhaps we can look to see if it might provide us with any useful analogy for how to deal with wrongdoing in other situations and contexts. It comes from a great book by the philosopher Martha Nussbaum called Anger and Forgiveness, Resentment, Generosity, Justice. And in the book, she says the following, and I quote, "When a child commits a bad act, a good family will convey to the child the clear message about the unacceptability of the act, but in a spirit of love and generosity, encouraging the child to separate the child's basic ongoing self from the wrongful act and to think of him or herself as capable of good in the future. It helps if the parents model the virtues themselves," right? Now, I'm going to ask you to think about whether or not we can find in this example a model for us to answer that question, right? What should be our guiding principle in deciding how to respond and confront wrongdoing? And is anger, even though understandable, ever justified? So I want you to think about the story that I told about the young black boy and the white sheriff, as well as the questions that I posed here. And we'll consider them as we go through the 6th and 7th practice of graceful presence, and then on to our discussion of caring for the self and caring for others. So next time we'll explore the 6th and 7th practice of graceful presence. Until then, be gracefully present to your life. I know you can. I believe in you, so start today. The quiz access code will be 0543. And once again, I thank you for your presence.